China is the most active foreign buyer of real estate in the U.S. According to the National Association of Realtors, Chinese investors spent $6.1 billion on American real estate in the past year, more than any other foreign buyers. The state with the heaviest volume of purchases was Florida, accounting for nearly a quarter of all international real estate purchases in the U.S. But Florida Governor Ron DeSantis told Fox News that he didn't think companies with ties to the Chinese Communist Party should be allowed to buy up American real estate assets. He's vowed to crack down on undue influence from rogue states like the Chinese regime, saying we want to make sure that we're cutting ties so that we're not funding our number one adversary. A panel discussion aimed at uncovering the true nature of the Chinese Communist Party was successfully held last week, but not without issues. The event's organizer reportedly received a death threat from suspected Chinese authorities. Here's a closer look.
On Wednesday, a panel was held to discuss the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP. The event was called Wake Up to the CCP's Threat. It was organized by the Global Service Center for Quitting the CCP and the Mount Hope Chinese Association. The Global Service Center for Quitting the CCP helps members of the party and its affiliated organizations renounce their support for the regime. Part of that process involves choosing pseudonyms to protect their safety and to prevent retaliation from Chinese authorities. 2 days ahead of the event, one of the organizers, Chris Chung, received the following voice message.
Hello, this is a representative of the Chinese Communist Party. We at the Chinese Communist Party have a particular set of skills. We will cook you a great chicken curry, and then we will find you, and we will kill you.
The message also told Chung, quote, if you attend the 7 p.m. event, you are responsible for the consequences. The event organizers reported it to the police and FBI. In the end, the panel still went smoothly, with police standing by on site. Among the highlights of the event, American professor Zhang Tianling explained how the Chinese regime infiltrates the U.S. through 5 methods. Those are overseas propaganda, data collection, intellectual property theft, political agents, and educational or cultural exchange programs. The panel was held in Mount Hope, a town located in upstate New York. Locals voiced positive feedback.
I thought it was very, very informational, and I benefited greatly from being here.
The town's mayor also voiced support and explained what he believes the event brought to the community.
People here in the community can educate themselves, so this way that communism doesn't come here to America. Very important. But I think it's even more bold and more brave for the panelists and the organizers to come through and hold such a great community event to show the CCP that they can't scare us into hiding.
What's more, a panel member explained why the threat Chung received is so significant.
But they use threats commonly to threaten and make people feel afraid, to have that fear. And that's even more reason why America is the land of the free, home of the brave. We need to stand for those values and to not succumb to the fear of the CCP, the terror that the CCP rules by.
The Chinese Communist Party has reportedly been recruiting informants inside the Federal Reserve. At one point, the regime even allegedly threatened to imprison a Fed economist during a trip to Shanghai. It was an attempt to force him to offer non-public American economic data. Those details come from a recent Senate report and represent the latest Beijing effort to gather sensitive American data. Its goal? To build a network of influence inside U.S. institutions and government agencies. The report also reveals that in 2015, the Federal Reserve identified 13 of its staff as persons of interest who had troubling ties to the Chinese regime. Now, the Republican-led Senate committee that published the report is at odds with the Fed. The Republicans are scolding the Fed for failing to combat Chinese espionage attempts. Well, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell is strongly pushing back on the report. On Monday, Powell wrote in a letter calling the findings unfair, unsubstantiated, and unverified insinuations. The Chinese regime denies the espionage accusations. The Senate report reveals that in one case, a Fed worker was allegedly detained on 4 separate occasions during a 2019 trip to Shanghai. Chinese officials were said to have threatened to harm his family unless he offered up sensitive American economic data. Chinese officials also reportedly tapped his phones and computers and copied the contact info of other Fed officials from his WeChat account. The Chinese official then allegedly asked him to sign a letter promising not to discuss the incident with anyone. A Chinese state-owned company is buying a forestry plantation in the Solomon Islands. But when the Chinese delegation visited the island, they asked nothing about the forests. Instead, reports say they were extra curious about the length of the wharf, an area where ships dock to load and unload, and the depth of the water. Other than tens of thousands of acres of forest, the plantation also covers a deep water port and a World War II-era airstrip. The purchase plan has raised alarms in Australia and allied countries about the Chinese regime's real plan. Beijing has already signed a security agreement with the Solomon Islands, causing panic in the West. And given the island's strategically important location, many have suspected that what the regime really wants is a military base on the Pacific Island. In an interview, former U.S. National Security Council advisor Alex Gray explained why the Solomon Islands are so important.
I think that if Solomon Islands ends up with a dual-use facility or a permanent base or some in-between hybrid model that gives the Chinese access, it's going to be the most devastating impact on the security of the first island chain going into the second island chain since World War II. It'll be the greatest threat to Australian national security since 1945. I don't think you can exaggerate how much of a danger it will be to the alliance structure that the United States has built.
The first island chain consists of a group of islands including Taiwan, Japan's Okinawa, and the Philippines. It was seen as the first line of defense to contain the spread of Soviet Union influence during the Cold War, and now Communist China. The second island chain contains U.S. naval base Guam. Gray mentioned that the Solomon Islands are only a few hours' flight from Australia, and the islands sit astride Australia's sea lines of communication.
There's a reason why thousands of Americans died in World War II fighting to keep Henderson Field on Guadalcanal operative, because the control of that island is absolutely critical for Australia's outlet to the wider world. And I think there is a real, not just Australian national imperative, but an American national imperative from an alliance management standpoint in keeping the Solomons from going down this path.
As reported by Australian media outlet ABC, the current owners of the forestry plantation are voicing concerns. Taiwanese and Australian shareholders wrote a letter to the Australian government in May, warning that the sale could pose risks or strategic threats to Australia. They say actions are needed to prevent China from taking control of the port and airstrip and establishing a base. According to ABC, Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade wrote back to the board last week, saying it was not intervening. Beyond that, overseas companies are struggling under the restrictions. Brands like Adidas and Maybelline New York are both facing major challenges in China.
Now we look at the business sector. Adidas warned that its business in China faces a slow recovery. Now it's cutting its 2022 earnings goal as a result of its full-year net revenue coming in at least $500 million lower than it expected. The German sportswear maker has met difficulties in the Chinese market since 2021. That's due to its concerns about forced labor accusations tied to the Uyghur ethnic group. And this year, it's grappling with China's zero COVID-19 policy and lockdowns, laying out an even steeper path to economic recovery. Another brand, skincare and cosmetics company Maybelline, is also facing trouble. It's now shut down all of its physical stores across China. The American brand entered China in 1997 and became popular with locals. But its Chinese market share fell from nearly 11% to under 5% in 2018. The same year, Maybelline started to pull its counters out of Chinese supermarkets. And in 2020, it began to leave department stores.